Now let's just summarise the reason why you state that the towers didn't hit the ground.
Well, they didn't burn up, nor did they slam to the ground, but turned into dust in midair. And we know that because if they slammed to the ground, we'd have a pile of rubble left over. If they slammed to the ground, the seismic signal would have shown that, which it didn't. And if they slammed to the ground, they're actually built in the Hudson River, 70 feet below the water table on bedrock. And so there's this dike around them. You get 2 half-million-ton buildings and another 250,000-ton building and slam it down, you're going to bust the water retaining wall.
And there's a whole lot of other evidence concerning things that were made of metal that were isolated from the ground, such as cars that had all of these bizarre effects that you wouldn't have expected if 2 buildings had collapsed through a conventional mean.
The effects were material specific.
All right. Now, normally you would focus strictly on the physical evidence, and you have done so far in your book and in your lectures. But this time in this tour, you're speaking more about the cover-up of this information and how that cover-up has been orchestrated and the psychology behind it. Can you just explain that for us, Judy?
Yes, the buildings turned to dust in midair. If you look at it, you can see that. Why do so many people not see it? Why was nearly the entire world fooled that day? And in order for people to see what happened, they have to figure out how to get around this. And I found there's 3 things that keep them from seeing it. Number 1, problem-solving skills. Number 2, groupthink or peer pressure. And number 3, they're terrified by the implications. But of the problem-solving skills, I've said this before about the importance of first determining what happened before you can determine how it happened. You have to determine what it is, and that before you can determine who did it or why they did it and so forth. And what I've discovered is one of the easiest ways to run a cover-up and to keep the cover-up safe is to get folks to focus on how it happened. Because if you start out with how it happened before you've determined what it is, you're assuming what it is. So you're solving an imagined problem, not a real problem. You haven't defined the problem. When I teach in statics class, first thing you have to teach students is to make the problem statement. Here's the problem statement. Here's what you're looking for. Here's the information given. Draw a line, what you're going to look for. Draw a line, go about solving it. And you have to define that problem before you can solve it. Once you define it, it gets a lot easier to solve.
Right.
And few people do that. So if you get people to focus on how it was done, they go round and round arguing about opinions of whatever, and they never will solve it.
And it will create contention within that as well. I've actually, in my talks, called it a phony bone of contention, which is contention around something which has a flawed assumption within it.
And it goes round, 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 round.
Okay. All right. And I know that Andrew Johnson has spoken at length and written a book about the 9/11 cover-up.
Yep. Another thing that I often talk about, you know, if you don't like the lie behind door number 1, they'll show you lie behind door number 2. You don't like that one, lie behind door number 3. Whatever to keep you from looking at the open field behind you.
And you talk about the psychology of denial because the implications are just too grotesque for people to face. And I'm actually experiencing that with some British members of Parliament that I've been writing to about another thing, which is the 7/7 London bombings. And I would describe them as being in, well, some kind of psychotic state, which is it's denial. They're not even looking at the evidence.
Do you remember in first grade, there was usually, at least when I was in first grade, that's what it was going on, about Santa Claus, the Santa Claus myth, and some kid would tell others that Santa Claus doesn't exist, and they'd all get mad at him. No, it does exist, and some kids would be crying if they learned about that. I guess kids are actually learning earlier now because they're exposed to that. But the anger in that, it's just like the end of the world. To learn that what they know doesn't exist, or to learn that their parents lied to them in this con job, and actually think it might be a good thing to help them get used to the idea that they can be conned.
Now, for those who actually question whether or not the towers did in fact turn to dust in mid-air, there's a clip which I don't think I've shown on Rich Planet before of, if you just describe this clip, Judy, I don't think I've seen this one.
If you look at this is the northwest corner of the North Tower, You see that vertical line near the center of the image, and you'll notice in a little bit there will be a whitish beam that you'll see dropping down. And it'll emerge, and as it emerges you see this opaque trail of dust behind it. And it becomes clearer and clearer, it's trailing dust, then pretty soon it runs out of dust to trail because it no longer exists. It becomes dust. And then when you look at it at full speed, you not only realize this beam is doing that, but everything in the image is doing that. And if you look down at the intersection right after where that stuff was falling, it's not there.